Hello, and welcome to Continuing the Conversation, where we bring in experts from around the world to go beyond the headlines and take it up where the news left off. I'm Brian Thomas, and in this edition, we're taking a look at ISIS and the caliphate it says it wants to create in Iraq and Syria. This radical Sunni group says it will be a model for the entire Islamic world in the years ahead. Well, will it? Where does it get its funding? Who's in command of this organization? And does it pose a threat, as it says it wants to Europe and the United States? For some answers, let's turn to an expert on the region, a man who's published a number of books on political Islam and who is a regular guest on German Network News, Michael Lüders. Michael, first off, welcome to the program. We understand that ISIS now has taken control of the major oil facility at Baji. It's also in control of major population centers like Mosul. It's certainly getting a lot of funding from these locations. Our first question is, where's it getting its money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You mentioned the most important aspect, the selling of oil to various actors in the region. It's quite interesting to note that oil is even being sold to the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which is the arch enemy of ISIS. But it seems that, once it comes to business, there is no guarantee that they will not cooperate with anybody, which is good because it shows to a certain extent that they are pragmatic. Then another source of income is, of course, the very fact that they do control the border checkpoints towards Turkey, which means that they have a direct control over all goods that enter Syria from Turkey. And of course, these goods are being taxed, and those who want to import goods or export them towards Turkey, they need to pay as well. Then, of course, there is a general taxation system. People who live under the control of ISIS have, to pay taxes. And last not least, there are very rich people in the Gulf states, mainly in Saudi Arabia, who sympathize with the ideology of ISIS, and they are willing to fund their activities. Why do they do that? Well, the main reason is really that they sympathize with their radical ideology. They want this radical Sunni group to become a bulwark against the Shiites in Iraq and in Iran. So in other words, from their point of view, ISIS is a tool to weaken the Shiite population in Iraq and to weaken Iran.
Okay, now it has a number of multiple sources of funding, as you mentioned. That money is flowing into its coffers. One of the objectives for using that money is certainly buying weapons. It already has, as we understand, a Scud missile, Apache attack helicopters from arsenals in the United States, as well as advanced tanks. Does it have the capacity right now or in the near future to take on national armies like that of Syria or Iraq?
Well, in fact, they already do. I mean, ISIS is the most serious challenge to the government of Bashar al-Assad, and at the same time, they have overrun government positions in Iraq. Of course, they are very much profiting from the fact that the Iraqi army is not really willing to fight, mainly due to the fact that this army, the Iraqi army, is corrupt. And why should a normal recruit who is being paid $50 to $60 a month risk his life fighting ISIS fighters who earn between $300 and $400 a month? Quite on the contrary, ISIS invites ordinary Sunni soldiers from the Iraqi army to join ranks with them. And many people do that because they are being paid much better. And in Syria, again, it's quite interesting to note that theoretically, the regime of Bashar al-Assad would be able to fight ISIS, but he doesn't do so. Why? Because he realizes, Bashar al-Assad does, that ISIS is becoming a serious threat for the region and also for the Europeans. And he is hoping for Western countries to really readdress him, come to him and say, look, we want you to fight ISIS. You are the man who can do the bloody business. And as a reward, we accept you as the ruler of Syria. Bashar al-Assad is waiting for that type of deal, and he is really the big winner of the ongoing crisis, apart from the Kurds in northern Iraq.
Okay, now one prism that could simplify our view of the situation is perhaps oil prices. Is ISIS capable of putting oil production, if not in certain parts of Iraq completely out of commission, pulling back the scale of production and oil exports from Iraq, the world's second largest producer?
Theoretically, yes, they would be able to do so. And in fact, oil prices have risen sharply over the past 4 weeks. But nevertheless, I don't see this as a major point of their agenda. Why should they do so? They would be more interested in selling oil and fill their coffins. And I think this is what they're really interested in. They will continue to sell oil from Iraq, from Syria, but they will cash in themselves. I mean, it's a huge source of income for them, and that's really a very worrisome aspect. The fact that ISIS is really the best funded of all terrorist organizations worldwide.
Okay, now what about the West? Are we in danger of being attacked by ISIS? Could there be an attack here in Berlin, for example?
Well, theoretically, definitely, but this is really medium-term thinking. For the time being, it's mainly the Iraqis and the Syrians who suffer from the onslaught of ISIS and their military success. But indeed, if things continue to deteriorate in that pace, we will see a terrorist problem. And security services in Europe are very worried about jihad fighters coming from Europe, moving towards Syria and Iraq, and learning how to build bombs, learning how to plant them in public buildings, for instance, and then return to Europe and go for terrorist attacks. This is really a serious threat to be taken very seriously, but there is no indication whatsoever for the time being that this threat is imminent.
Okay, now Russia has sent some top-level Sukhoi jets to the Iraqi military. America is also providing troops and weapons. How is that going to work out? Two powers that are conducting a proxy war right now in eastern Ukraine, basically, now facing off in a way in Iraq on the same side.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to see how things evolve in political terms. Of course, the Russians were very happy to deliver weapons to the Iraqi regime. They did so because the Americans showed very reluctant in delivering modern aircrafts to the regime of Maliki in Baghdad. And also there's a technical problem. There are barely any Iraqi pilots who are able to fly American gunships or military airplanes. But the older Russian models are very well known to the Iraqi military, and they're able to fly them themselves. And indeed, as you mentioned, it's quite interesting to see that Russia and the United States, plus the United States and Iran, do share a common interest. They don't want ISIS to get stronger and stronger, because ISIS is also a threat to Russian interests in the region, mainly in view of the very unstable region of southern Caucasus, where there are many Sunni-based Islamic fighters who are keen on fighting Moscow within its own borders.
Before we go, one last question, Michel. What does the West need to do over the next 3 to 6 months before ISIS becomes entrenched and before it becomes much more difficult to move it out of its positions in Mosul and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a very justified question, but unfortunately difficult to answer because there is no recipe that might work. A military option is very difficult to achieve. ISIS is very strong because it does have the backing of most Sunni tribes in Iraq and also in parts of Syria and Jordan. So there is no way to simply fight these people because they are dressed just like you and me. You will not be able to distinguish an ISIS fighter from a normal Bedouin in that area. So a military option is more or less out of the question, which leaves the political option. And what are the political options? Basically, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, the local players and actors, need to talk to each other and find a compromise. Saudi Arabia and Iran need to learn to coexist with each other. So far, they have shown unwilling to really find a compromise on any issue in the Middle East. All this is theory, though. In practice, we will not see a closer cooperation between local actors in the region. So I think things have to deteriorate for some time to come until people in the region will learn that the development is too dangerous to simply let it go. Will it work in the end to constrain this onslaught of ISIS? Very difficult to say. I think the main threat for ISIS comes from within its own ranks. There are too many people involved within ISIS who share the desire of becoming the boss, the chairman of this organization, and this desire by local fighters to become leaders might lead to a split. Also, let us not forget that the Sunnis in Iraq are, basically speaking, moderate people. They only align themselves with ISIS because they hate the Shiite-dominated government of Mr. Maliki. They want to see the toppling of this government. But once this goal is achieved, they will be happy to return to a normal way of life, and ISIS is definitely not part of this equation. They will fight ISIS as soon as they have reached their political demands.
Okay, so the political solution, the best way forward right now, bringing in regional players, including Turkey and Israel, to sit down at the table and start talking about this. Michael Lüders, thanks so much for continuing the conversation with us today here at this broadcast. Thank you so much as well for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time as we continue the conversation.